Greetings, my name is Odin from the Odin's Musings YouTube channel, and I'm here on behalf of Aura Crystals. Today I'm going to be showing you how to create the flat spiral stitch. This is a great introduction to using shaped beads and another variation in one of these spiral stitches. You can have a lot of fun with changing up the shapes and personalizing this piece to your tastes or a friend's if you're making these for gifts. This is a very super quick stitch and something that can easily be done in an afternoon. For this project you will need size 11 seed beads. You will also need 6mm beads. Today I am using round pearls, but feel free to experiment with shapes and use things such as fire polish rounds, bicones, and even cube beads. For a 7.5-inch bracelet, I've used about 30 of these beads, so be sure to adjust accordingly to fit your wrist size. I'm also going to be using 3mm bicones. Feel free to use any 3mm shape. This looks just fine with fire polish rounds or even round pearls. I've used double the amount of 3mm beads, so if I've used 30 of the 6mm, I'm going to use 60 of the 3mm. You will also need a stop bead or a spring stopper. And I'm using a D-weight white Nymo. Feel free to use a mid-weight Fireline if that's what you like. Anywhere between 4 and 8 pound test will be just fine. I'm also using a size 12 beading needle, but feel free to use whichever size you feel most comfortable with. You will also need a clasp of your choice. I'm using a lobster claw accompanied by a 6mm jump ring. And with that, let us get started. So for the first step, I'm going to just add my stop bead, which is just putting my bead at the end of my thread. I'm going to leave about a 6 to 8 inch tail so that I can do the clasp at the other end. Then I'm going to pass my needle back through the same bead to hold it in place. If you're using a spring stopper, all you have to do is open it up, slide your thread into one of the grooves, and pinch it close. So the flat spiral works very similar to the regular round spiral rope, so if you know how to do that, you'll be pretty comfortable with doing this stitch. I will also leave a link down in the description as well as a card up in this corner, so that you can check that video out as well. So I'm going to start off by threading on 2 of my 6mm beads, 5 seed beads, 1 3mm bead, and 5 seed beads. I'm going to pull that all the way down to my stop bead, and then I'm going to pass back through just the 2 6mm rounds. I'm going to pull that through so that the rest of these seed beads wrap around the 2. What I'm basically doing is creating 2 sides of seed bead flaps on the outside of the larger beads. So I'm going to do that again. So to add my second side, I'm going to add 5 seed beads, 1 3mm, and 5 seed beads. Pull that down, and then I'm going to go back through those 2 6mm beads in order to wrap the other side. Now I'm ready for my next stitch. So this unit can be considered the starter stitch, and we progress with this. So I'm only going to add 1 6mm, then 5 seed beads, 1 3mm, and 5 seed beads. I'm going to pull that down on top of the rest of the bracelet. And for each stitch, I only need to go through 2 beads. So what I'm going to do to finish this stitch is dig down until I am in the second bead and pass through the 6mm that I've just added. I'm going to pull through so that this flap sits on top of the previous one. You always want to be careful and make sure that these 2 flaps stay on the side so that the new stitches can go right on top so they don't twist around. And that's the start of our first stitch. So to make the second side, I'm going to add 5 seed beads, 1 3mm, and 5 seed beads, pull that down, and once again, pass through the second and third bead. As we pull tight, we're going to want to make sure that this flap lands on top of the previous one. And there's the next link in our chain. So I'm going to add 1 more stitch, which starts off with 1 6mm, 5 seed beads, 1 3mm, and 5 seed beads. We pull that down to the rest of our piece. And since we only need to go through 2 6mm beads, I only want to go through number 3 and number 4. So I'm going to dig my needle down between the last 2 beads until I've picked up number 3, and I'm also going to pick up number 4. I pull that down, and I would have formed one side of the next stitch. And we're making sure each of the next stitches goes on top of the previous one. So to finish that stitch off, I'm going to add 5 seed beads, a 3mm, 5 seed beads, dig down and pass through number 3 and number 4. Pull through, and that's the next stitch. And that is exactly how we go. Now, if you're finding that the stitches go underneath, you can move in that progression. This just means that you've flipped over the pattern. So if you flip it back up, all the flaps will then end up right on top of each other instead. So on this side, if we're in this direction, all of the stitches are underneath the previous one. But if we flip it over, all of the stitches are on top of the previous one. So just keep that in mind as you're progressing. I'll show you one more stitch for good measure. So we start off by adding 1 6mm, 5 seed beads, 1 3mm, and 5 seed beads. We pull that down. We want to go through the last 2 beads. So I dig my needle down to pick up number 4. And I can also slide on number 5. And pull that close to form one flap of our stitch. Finish off the stitch with 5 seed beads, a 3mm, 5 seed beads. Dig down and pick up number 4 and number 5 again. Pull tight and form your second flap. And that's it. Continue in that manner for a little bit until you're comfortable, and then I can tell you about ending threads and attaching your clasp. Now, it is technically possible to do the entire bracelet in just one thread. You'll probably need about 2 yards or 2 meters, but in case you haven't measured correctly, I can show you how to end your threads. So we're going to end off finishing a total stitch. This means we've got both sides around our 2 beads. All I'm going to do is pass down through a few of the seed beads that are on one of the flaps. I'm going to do what's called a half-hitch knot in order to secure my thread. So I'm going to pass my needle underneath this loop of beads until I catch the thread bridge that's between the seed beads where I've just landed. I'm going to pull my thread through until I form a loop. Then I'm going to pass my needle through that loop and pull tight, making sure that I end up where I started. So in this example, I was between the 4th and 5th bead. So I pulled tight and I formed one knot. I'm going to pass down a few more of these beads and do the same thing. So I'm going to pass my needle down until I've caught the thread in between the 2nd and 3rd seed beads. I'm going to pull through until I form a loop with my thread, pass my needle through that loop, and pull tight, making sure that the knot ends up where I started from. Keep going down. Do that once more. I'm going to catch the thread that's by the pearl. Pass my needle through until I form a loop. Pull my needle through that loop and pull tight. And to finish off, I'm just going to pass through the next pearl down. Now, since I've added 3 knots, that's about secure enough for me, but feel free to keep on adding knots in between the pearls as well and progress down. But once you feel it's comfortably tight, I'm just going to clip my end right here. So to attach a new thread, I'm going to start a fair bit ways down because I don't want to end up with too many knots over where I need to work my threads. So I'm going to start about here, which is about 6 beads down. I'm going to dig through and pick up the pearl that's that far down, and I'm going to pull through, leaving about an inch tail so I have something to hang on to in case it slips. Now from here, I'm going to dig down until I've picked up a thread in between the beads. Once again, create my knots. Pass through the loop and pull tight, taking care that I don't capture any other beads in my process. Then from there, move up through the next pearl. Do it again. Pick up a thread in between some of the beads here. Pull through until I form a loop with my thread. Pass my needle through and pull tight. Go up through one more pearl and make one more knot. Now since I've made 3 knots, I'm just going to pass all the way up to the top bead. So as you can see, I have all 3 of my 6mm beads on my needle. I'm going to pull through, and from here, that's tight. That's tight. I can go ahead and clip my tail end. And from here, I can continue my stitch. So I add my beads, pass through the top 2 pearls, add my next set of beads, then pass through those last 2 beads again. And continue on until you have the length that you want. So all that's left to do is to attach our clasp. So starting off, coming out of the 6mm bead, I'm going to add 3 seed beads, half of my clasp, and 3 seed beads. Then I'm going to pass back down through the top 2 6mm beads. And when I pull tight, I'll have the start of my loop here. Now in order to reinforce it, I'm going to pass back up through one entire side of the last flap. So I just went through the first 5 beads and the 3mm bead. I'm going to go through the next set of 5 seed beads. Then I'm going to go around back and pick up the seed beads attached to the clasp. Pick up the clasp and go around the next 3 seed beads. Then I'm going to go back down the top 2 6mm beads and repeat with the other side. So I'm going to go up the other side, starting to pass through the first seed beads, then the 3mm bead and the rest of the seed beads, move back and pick up the seed beads next to the clasp, pick up the clasp, and pick up the seed beads on the other side of the clasp. Then from there we go back down the top 2 6mm beads, and we finish off our threads by adding half hitch knots again. So you can either add them right in between the pearls here, or you can go up the sides and add 3 knots in between the seed beads around there. It's all up to you. Each way will end your threads fine. Then, on the other side, don't forget, pull off your stop bead and add your clasp on the other side, which in my case would be the small jump ring. So that is it for the flat spiral. It's a very simple stitch, but you can really change up the look of it just based on what beads you use. Keep in mind that the very last flap and the very bottom flap will remain loose around in your piece. You can reinforce it and sort of attach it to the next flaps if you feel like, but that's entirely optional. And when it's attached to your wrist, they stay flat anyway. So once you get comfortable with the basic stitch, feel free to experiment with different bead shapes and bead sizes. In this example, I've used bicones, and it gives a much edgier appearance. I've even used cubes just to make it a little more different and interesting in the center. I've even graduated the size of the 3mm and added 4mm at the end just to add a little bit of contrast. I've used 4mm round pearls with size 15 seed beads, and it adds a bit more of a delicate approach. Either way, whatever you choose will be magnificent. So that will do it for this lesson. Thank you so much for joining me. Be sure to check out the description box below for more details on materials and links to where you can purchase. Feel free to subscribe to Aura Crystals for getting updates on new techniques and design ideas. And if you'd like to see more of my work, feel free to check me out on Odin's Musings right here on YouTube or at odinsbeadhall.com.